The sky over Shafter, Texas painted stories most folks never learned to read. But Amelia Olsen could decipher every brushstroke of cloud and shift in the wind like other women read recipe books. And on that scorching afternoon in June of 1883, she stood on the porch of the general store watching darkness gather on the western horizon with a dread that settled deep in her bones. She had come to this dusty border town 3 months earlier, a 22-year-old woman alone after her father's death, carrying nothing but his journals filled with observations about weather patterns and atmospheric changes, knowledge he had passed to her since she was old enough to understand that nature spoke in a language all its own. Shafter sat in the Chihuahuan Desert, a silver mining town that had seen better days, where cattle ranchers struggled against the unforgiving land, and everyone depended on understanding when the rains would come or when drought would strangle their hopes. The townsfolk thought her odd at first, this slender woman with auburn hair she kept braided down her back, who would stop mid-conversation to study the sky with green eyes that seemed to see through the blue into something deeper. But Amelia had proven herself useful at the boarding house where she worked, warning Mrs. Henderson about flash floods that saved the woman's vegetable garden, predicting dry spells that helped the blacksmith plan his work when he needed consistent heat. Today, though, something terrible was building in the atmosphere, and Amelia felt it like a physical weight pressing against her chest. The air had gone still and heavy, the kind of stillness that made animals nervous and sent birds flying low to the ground. She watched the clouds rolling in, their bellies dark and swollen, but it was not rain they carried. The temperature had climbed past 100 degrees, and now wind was beginning to gust from the southwest, hot and dry as a furnace blast. "You look worried, Miss Olsen," came a voice beside her, and Amelia turned to see Samuel Crawford, the general store owner, wiping his hands on his apron. "There's a storm coming," she said quietly. "A bad one. Not rain, though, dust, the worst I have ever sensed." Samuel squinted at the horizon, doubt evident in his weathered face. "Sky looks dark, sure enough, but how can you tell it is dust and not a thunderstorm? We could use the rain." Amelia shook her head, frustration tightening her throat. This was always the hardest part, making people understand what she knew with certainty, but could not quite explain in ways that satisfied their need for logic. "The clouds are wrong. See how they are rolling, not billowing upward like storm clouds. And the wind is coming from the desert, carrying that burnt smell. Feel how hot it is. Thunder clouds bring cool air ahead of them. This is different. This is going to be massive." Samuel nodded slowly, though she could tell he only half believed her. "Well, best get inside then when it hits." But Amelia was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about the ranches scattered across the landscape, the cattle grazing miles from shelter, the cowboys who might not see this coming until it was too late. Her mind went particularly to the Kimble Ranch, the largest spread in the area, which ran over 2,000 head of cattle across 30,000 acres of harsh desert rangeland. She had seen the cowboys in town, dust-covered and exhausted, and heard them talking about moving a huge herd to new grazing land near the mountains. One cowboy in particular had caught her attention over the past weeks, though she had tried to ignore the flutter in her chest whenever she saw him. Ethan Kimble, the ranch owner's son, 25 years old and already carrying the weight of the family business on his broad shoulders. His father had taken ill last winter and never fully recovered, leaving Ethan to manage everything while trying to prove himself capable to the hands who had worked the ranch for decades. Amelia had first spoken to Ethan 4 weeks ago when he came into the general store for supplies. She had been helping Samuel stock shelves when Ethan walked in, his hat dusty and his blue eyes tired but sharp. He had a strong jaw covered in a few days of stubble, and moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. When he smiled at her in greeting, something warm had bloomed in her chest. "Afternoon," he had said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "You are Miss Olsen, right? Heard you predicted that cold snap we got last week. Saved quite a few new calves because we brought them in closer to shelter." Amelia had felt her cheeks warm under his direct gaze. "I just pay attention to the signs. Anyone could learn it." "Maybe," Ethan had replied, leaning against the counter with casual grace. "But most folks are too busy or too stubborn to look up at the sky instead of down at their boots. I appreciate someone who understands how much weather matters out here. Lost too many head to unexpected freezes and dry spells." They had talked for 20 minutes that day, and Amelia found herself drawn to his quiet intelligence and the way he actually listened when she explained what she saw in cloud formations and wind patterns. Unlike other men who dismissed her knowledge as women's intuition or lucky guessing, Ethan asked questions, wanted to understand the reasoning behind her predictions. He had come back to the store several times since, always finding reasons to talk with her, and Amelia had caught herself watching for his tall frame and easy stride whenever she heard horses outside. Now, staring at the approaching wall of darkness, she knew with absolute certainty that he was out there somewhere with his herd, and they were all in terrible danger. Dust storms in this region could reduce visibility to 0 in seconds, create static electricity that panicked animals, and bury anything caught in the open under inches of choking dirt. Cattle could stampede and scatter for miles, cowboys could get lost and suffocate, and entire herds could be decimated in a single afternoon. She made her decision in a heartbeat. Grabbing her shawl from inside the store, Amelia hurried down the wooden steps toward the livery stable. Samuel called after her, but she did not stop. She had to warn them. She had to reach Ethan before that storm hit. The stable owner, a grizzled man named Pete, looked at her like she had lost her mind when she asked to rent a horse. "Miss Olsen, I do not think you should be riding out with that weather coming in. Better to stay in town where it is safe." "I need to reach the Kimble ranch," Amelia insisted, already checking the saddle on the gentlest mare Pete owned. "They have their whole herd out in the open, and they do not know what is coming. Someone has to warn them." Pete scratched his beard, looking uncertain, but something in Amelia's face must have convinced him of her seriousness. "That storm looks mean, I will grant you. But the Kimble place is 8 miles out. You might not make it before it hits. Then I need to leave right now." Amelia swung up into the saddle with more confidence than she felt. She had learned to ride as a girl but was far from expert, especially on unfamiliar horses. Still, fear for Ethan and his men drove her forward. She rode out of Shafter at a gallop, her braid bouncing against her back, her skirts hiked up in a way that would have scandalized the church ladies if they had seen. The road to the Kimble ranch stretched out before her, a pale ribbon of dirt cutting through the desert scrub. Mesquite and creosote bushes dotted the landscape, and the mountains rose in the distance, hazy in the building heat. Behind her, the storm was moving fast. Amelia could feel the wind picking up, gusting harder now, and when she glanced back her heart sank. The wall of dust was massive, towering thousands of feet into the air, a roiling brown monster that devoured the horizon. It was moving faster than she had expected, faster than her horse could run. She leaned forward, urging the mare on, praying she could reach the ranch in time. The minutes blurred together as she rode, her hands tight on the reins, her breath coming hard. The temperature seemed to climb even higher, and sweat soaked through her dress. The wind was constant now, pulling at her clothes and hair, carrying the first hints of dust that stung her eyes. She pulled her shawl up over her nose and mouth, squinting against the glare. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, she spotted cattle in the distance. Hundreds of them, spread across a wide valley between low hills, grazing on the sparse grass. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by renewed urgency. She could see cowboys riding among the herd, small figures on horseback, and she waved her arm frantically, shouting though she knew they could not hear her yet. As she got closer, one of the riders noticed her and turned his horse in her direction. Even from a distance, she recognized Ethan's posture, the way he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle. He rode toward her quickly, and she could see the concern on his face as he took in her disheveled appearance and obvious urgency. "Miss Olsen." Ethan called as he drew near, his voice sharp with worry. "What are you doing out here? Is something wrong in town?" Amelia pulled her mare to a halt, breathing hard, and pointed back toward Shafter. "Storm coming. Massive dust storm. It will be here in minutes. You need to get your herd to shelter now." Ethan turned in his saddle, following her gesture, and his face went pale beneath his tan. The wall of dust was clearly visible now, a dark churning mass that seemed to fill the entire western sky. Even as they watched, it grew closer, the roar of wind beginning to reach them like distant thunder. "Jesus," Ethan breathed, then immediately kicked his horse into motion. "Come on." He wheeled around and galloped back toward his crew, and Amelia followed, her mare struggling to keep up with his powerful gelding. Ethan was shouting before he reached the other cowboys, his voice carrying across the valley. "Dust storm. Everyone, we have got maybe 5 minutes. Get these cattle moving east toward the canyon now." The other hands, 4 men Amelia recognized from town, immediately sprang into action. She could see the fear in their faces as they looked at the approaching storm, but they were professionals, working quickly and efficiently. They began pushing the herd, calling and whistling, their horses darting back and forth to drive the cattle in the right direction. Ethan rode back to Amelia, his blue eyes intense. "There is a canyon about a mile east with high walls. If we can get them there, the walls will provide some protection from the wind. But we need every hand. Can you help push them from the south side?" Amelia nodded, her heart pounding. "Tell me what to do." "Just ride along the edge of the herd and keep them moving east. If any break away, turn them back. Your horse knows what to do, trust her." Ethan reached out suddenly and squeezed her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong against hers. "Thank you for warning us. You probably just saved this entire herd." Then he was gone, riding hard toward the front of the mass of cattle that was slowly beginning to move. Amelia took her position on the southern flank, doing her best to follow Ethan's instructions. The mare seemed to understand what was needed, responding to the cattle's movements almost instinctively, and Amelia found herself swept up in the controlled chaos of the drive. The storm was closing fast. The wind was now a constant howl, and dust was beginning to fill the air in choking clouds. Visibility dropped rapidly, and Amelia pulled her shawl tighter around her face, her eyes watering. She could barely see the cattle nearest to her, just dark shapes moving through the brown haze. The sound was incredible, the lowing of frightened animals mixed with the thunder of thousands of hooves and the shriek of wind. Something loomed out of the dust ahead, a darker mass, and Amelia realized they had reached the canyon. The walls rose on either side, not tall but enough to provide some shelter, and the cattle were funneling into the narrow space. Cowboys appeared and disappeared in the swirling dust like ghosts, their voices hoarse from shouting, driving the panicked animals forward. Amelia's mare stumbled, and she grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling. Her world had narrowed to just the few feet around her, everything beyond lost in the choking brown murk. She could not see Ethan or any of the other hands. Fear gripped her, fear of being lost in this maelstrom, but she forced herself to keep moving, to keep pushing forward. A hand suddenly grabbed her reins, and she looked up to find Ethan beside her, his face covered with a bandana, his eyes red and streaming. He was leading her mare deeper into the canyon, one hand on her horse and the other managing his own. Amelia held on tight, trusting him completely as they moved through the nightmare of dust and wind. Finally, they reached a place where the canyon walls curved inward, creating a protected alcove. Other cowboys had gathered there with their horses, and the cattle were packed tight in the canyon beyond, their shapes barely visible. Ethan helped Amelia dismount, and they pressed against the canyon wall with the others, using their horses as additional windbreaks. The storm hit with full force. It was like being inside a living thing, a monster of wind and dust that roared and clawed at everything. Amelia could not breathe without choking, could not see more than inches in front of her face. She felt Ethan's arm come around her shoulders, pulling her against his chest, his other hand holding his bandana over her nose and mouth to help filter the air. She pressed close to him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, and held on as the world tried to tear itself apart around them. Time lost all meaning. They stood there in the howling darkness for what might have been minutes or hours. Amelia's legs ached, her throat burned, and every breath was a struggle. But Ethan never let go, his arm a constant reassurance, his presence an anchor in the chaos. She could feel him breathing, feel the tension in his muscles as he braced against the wind, and despite the terror of the situation, she felt a strange sense of safety in his arms. Gradually, impossibly, the wind began to ease. The roar diminished to a howl, then to a strong gust, and finally to an almost normal breeze. The dust began to settle, and visibility improved from inches to feet to yards. Amelia lifted her head from Ethan's chest and looked around at a transformed world. Everything was covered in a thick layer of fine brown dust. The canyon walls looked like they had been painted, the horses were ghostly figures, and the cowboys looked like statues made of dirt. Amelia could only imagine what she looked like, coated head to toe in the stuff. She started coughing, and Ethan rubbed her back gently. "You all right?" His voice was hoarse and rough, but filled with concern. Amelia nodded, still coughing, her eyes streaming. "Yes, I have been through worse." But his slight smile told her he was mostly just trying to reassure her. He looked exhausted, his face drawn beneath the mask of dust. "Let me check on the men and the herd." The other cowboys were emerging from their shelters, all of them coughing and dusting themselves off. Miraculously, everyone was accounted for. One man had a cut on his forehead from flying debris, but otherwise they were unharmed. The cattle had packed so tightly into the canyon that they had sheltered each other, and while they were skittish and dusty, the herd seemed largely intact. "We need to do a count," Ethan said, his voice carrying the weight of command despite his fatigue. "But I think we did it. I think we saved them." One of the older hands, a man named Rodriguez with silver in his dark hair, stepped forward and clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "That was some fine thinking, boss. Getting them into this canyon made all the difference. We would have lost half the herd out in the open." Ethan shook his head and turned to look at Amelia. "Was not my thinking. Miss Olsen here rode 8 miles to warn us. Without her, we would never have known what was coming until it was too late. She is the one who saved this herd." All eyes turned to Amelia, and she felt her cheeks burn despite the dust coating them. "I just read the weather. You all did the real work. You read it right, another cowboy said, respect clear in his tone. I have seen dust storms before, but nothing like that. That was a killer, and we would have been caught dead in the open if you had not warned us. The magnitude of what had almost happened settled over the group like a weight. 2,000 head of cattle represented not just the Kimble Ranch's financial future, but the livelihood of every man standing there. Losing that herd would have been catastrophic, potentially ruining the ranch and putting everyone out of work. Ethan was looking at Amelia with an expression she could not quite read, something intense and searching in his blue eyes. You put yourself in terrible danger to warn us. You could have been caught in that storm alone on the road. Why did you take that risk? Amelia met his gaze, her heart beating fast. The truth was she had been thinking of him specifically, worried about him, driven by feelings she barely understood herself. But she could not say that in front of all these men. Someone had to warn you. I could not just stand in town and watch that storm coming, knowing what it would do. Well, Ethan said softly, still holding her eyes, I am grateful, more grateful than I can say. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken, until Rodriguez cleared his throat. We should start moving the herd back to the home range, going to take the rest of the day to settle them down and make sure none wandered off. Ethan nodded, breaking eye contact with Amelia reluctantly. Right, let us get to work. He turned back to her. Miss Olsen, you should head back to town before it gets dark, but your horse looks worn out. Take my spare mount, he is stronger and faster. I will have someone bring your mare back to Pete tomorrow. I can ride with her part way, offered the youngest cowboy, a lanky kid who could not have been more than 19. Make sure she gets close to town safely. No need, Ethan said quickly. I will take her myself. You all can handle moving the herd. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but said nothing, though Amelia caught a knowing look pass between the older hands. Ethan either did not notice or did not care. He was already moving to saddle a fresh horse, a beautiful bay gelding that pranced nervously but calmed under his sure hands. The ride back to Shafter was vastly different from Amelia's frantic journey out. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the dust-filled sky in shades of orange and red. Everything was still coated in dirt, and they passed tumbleweeds and debris scattered across the landscape by the storm's force. But the air was calm now, almost eerily still after the violence of the past hours. Ethan rode beside Amelia in silence for the first mile, seeming lost in thought. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet. How did you know? About the storm, I mean. I have lived in this country my whole life, and I did not see it coming until you pointed it out. Amelia considered her answer carefully. My father was obsessed with weather. He studied it his entire life, kept journals of observations, tried to find patterns. He taught me everything he knew. I grew up learning to read the sky the way other children learn to read books. You notice things after a while. The way clouds form, the direction and temperature of wind, how animals behave, the smell of the air. It all tells a story if you know the language. Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was. Amelia felt the familiar ache of loss. He died 6 months ago, pneumonia. After that, I had no reason to stay in Colorado, so I came south. Shafter needed someone at the boarding house, and I needed a new start. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I am sorry about your father, but I am glad you came here, even more so now. They rode on, the miles passing easily despite their fatigue. Amelia found herself acutely aware of Ethan's presence beside her, the way he moved with his horse, the strong lines of his profile when she glanced over at him. She kept thinking about how it had felt to be held against him during the storm, how safe and protected she had felt in his arms. It was foolish to read too much into it. she told herself. He had simply been helping her survive the storm, nothing more. But then Ethan spoke again, and his words made her heart skip. "Would you have dinner with me? Tomorrow night, if you are free. I would like to thank you properly for what you did today, and I would like to get to know you better." Amelia turned to stare at him, and found him watching her with an expression that was hopeful and nervous at once, so different from the confident rancher who had been directing his men earlier. It made him seem more real, more human, and she felt a rush of warmth. "I would like that," she said, smiling despite her dust-covered face and exhaustion. Ethan's answering smile was brilliant, transforming his tired features. "Good. That is really good. I will pick you up at 6 if that works. There is a restaurant in town, Garcia's, that has decent food." "Garcia's is perfect." Amelia could not stop smiling, a giddy feeling bubbling up in her chest. They talked easily for the rest of the ride, conversation flowing naturally as they shared stories about their lives. Ethan told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's illness and the weight of responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders. Amelia talked about traveling with her father, the different places they had lived, the storms and weather patterns they had studied together. By the time they reached the outskirts of Shafter, Amelia felt like she had known Ethan for years instead of weeks. The town was recovering from the storm's passage. People were out sweeping dust from their porches and storefronts, and everyone who saw them stopped to stare. Amelia realized they must look like they had been through a war, covered in dirt and obviously exhausted. Ethan rode with her all the way to the boarding house, a 2-story wooden building on the main street. Mrs. Henderson came rushing out when she saw them, her round face creased with worry. "Amelia, thank goodness you are safe. I heard you rode out to warn the Kimble ranch and I have been worried sick." "I am fine, Mrs. Henderson," Amelia assured her, accepting Ethan's hand as he helped her dismount. His fingers lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary, sending tingles up her arm. "Just tired and dirty." Mrs. Henderson looked between Amelia and Ethan with sharp, assessing eyes. "Well, Mr. Kimble, I hope you know what a brave and extraordinary young woman this is. Not many would have risked themselves the way she did." "I am beginning to realize that, madam," Ethan said seriously. "I owe her a debt I can never fully repay." "Nonsense," Amelia said quickly, embarrassed. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You did what a hero does. Do not diminish that." He tipped his hat to both women. "Ladies, I need to get back to the ranch, but Miss Olsen, I will see you tomorrow at 6. "Tomorrow at 6, Amelia confirmed, her smile returning. She watched him ride away, sitting tall in the saddle despite his obvious exhaustion, and felt Mrs. Henderson's knowing gaze on her. "Well now," the older woman said, her tone amused, "that is an interesting development. Ethan Kimble is a good man, Amelia. His father built that ranch from nothing, and Ethan is proving himself more than worthy to carry it on. You could do much worse." "Mrs. Henderson, it is just dinner," Amelia protested, but she could not keep the pleased note from her voice. Just dinner, we shall see about that." Mrs. Henderson ushered her inside. "Now come on, let us get you cleaned up. You have got half the desert in your hair." The next day passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Amelia helped with chores at the boarding house, her mind only half on her work, the other half occupied with thoughts of the evening ahead. She kept replaying moments from the previous day in her mind, the way Ethan had looked at her, the strength of his arms around her during the storm, the warmth in his voice when he asked her to dinner. By late afternoon, she was a bundle of nerves. She washed thoroughly, scrubbing away every trace of dust, and brushed her auburn hair until it shone. She had few nice dresses, her wardrobe consisting mainly of practical work clothes, but she had one dress that was suitable for dinner out. It was a deep green that brought out her eyes, with a fitted bodice and full skirt, not fancy but respectable. Mrs. Henderson helped her with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was more sophisticated than her usual braid. "There now," the older woman said, standing back to admire her work. "You look lovely. That man will not know what hit him." "I am nervous," Amelia admitted. "What if I say something foolish?" "You will not. You are one of the smartest women I know. Just be yourself." Mrs. Henderson patted her shoulder. "And have a wonderful time." Ethan arrived precisely at 6, and when Amelia came downstairs, she found him waiting in the parlor looking nervous himself. He had cleaned up too, his dark hair still damp and combed back, his face freshly shaved. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt with a vest, his best boots polished. When he saw her, his eyes widened and a slow smile spread across his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Amelia's cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." The walk to Garcia's was short, just a few blocks through the heart of Shafter. The town was quiet in the evening, most people having finished their dinner and retired to their homes. The restaurant was a small adobe building with a welcoming glow of lamplight spilling from its windows. Inside, the air smelled of spices and roasted meat, and a matronly Mexican woman greeted them with a warm smile. "Senator Kimble, how nice to see you. And you brought a lady friend, how wonderful." She showed them to a small table in the corner, private but with a view of the whole room. They ordered food, and as they waited, the conversation flowed easily. Ethan was surprisingly easy to talk to, attentive and genuinely interested in what Amelia had to say. He asked her more about her weather predictions, wanting to understand the science behind it, and she found herself explaining concepts her father had taught her, things she rarely got to discuss with anyone. "So you are saying the atmosphere has patterns, like a language?" Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Exactly. Everything is connected. Temperature, pressure, humidity, wind. They all interact in complex ways, but there are patterns. If you know what to look for, you can often predict what is coming." Amelia paused. "Most people think it is just guessing, but it is not. It is observation and logic. I believe you. Yesterday proved you know what you are talking about." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her. "You saved my ranch, Amelia. I have been thinking about it all day. If we had lost that herd, we would have been finished. My father's life work, everything we have built, gone. Because of you, that did not happen." Amelia squeezed his hand, moved by the emotion in his voice. "I am just glad I got there in time." Their food arrived, steaming plates of beef and beans and fresh tortillas, and they ate with the appetite of people who had been through an ordeal. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and Amelia found herself laughing at Ethan's stories about ranch life, the mishaps and adventures that came with managing cattle and cowboys in the harsh desert landscape. "So there I was," Ethan said, grinning, "covered head to toe in mud, trying to explain to my father why I thought it was a good idea to try to rope a bull that was twice my size. I was 16 and thought I knew everything." "What did he say?" Amelia asked, smiling. "He looked at me for a long minute, covered in mud and probably lucky to be alive, and then he just said, 'Well, son, I reckon you learned something today,' and he walked away. I think he knew that me being humbled was punishment enough." Amelia laughed, delighted by the image. "Your father sounds wonderful." Ethan's expression softened. "He was. He is not the same since he got sick. Some days he does not even recognize me. It has been hard watching him fade." He paused, looking down at his plate. "Sorry that got dark." Do not apologize, I understand. I watched my father decline too. It is one of the hardest things in the world. Amelia reached out and touched his hand again. But your father would be proud of you, Ethan. The way you managed everything yesterday, how your men respect and trust you, that is not easy to earn. Ethan looked up at her, something vulnerable in his eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. They lingered over coffee after dinner, neither wanting the evening to end. The restaurant slowly emptied until they were the only customers left, and finally, with apologetic smiles from the staff, they had to leave. Ethan walked Amelia back to the boarding house slowly, both of them walking as if by mutual agreement, wanting to stretch out their time together. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Amelia found herself looking up at the sky habitually, reading the patterns of wind and clouds. "What do you see?" Ethan asked, following her gaze. "Clear weather for the next few days. The storm system has passed through completely. Should be good for your cattle. Good." Ethan stopped walking and Amelia turned to face him. They were standing in the shadow of a building, away from the few street lamps, and his face was partly in darkness. "Amelia, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I have been trying to work up the courage to ask you to dinner for weeks now. Every time I came into town, I told myself this would be the time, but I always chickened out." He gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Yesterday, when I saw you riding toward us, warning us about the storm, risking yourself for us, for me, something just clicked into place. I realized I did not want to wait anymore, did not want to be cautious. Life is too short and too uncertain." He stepped closer, and Amelia could see his eyes now, intense and sincere. "I know we have not known each other long, but I feel something when I am with you, something I have never felt before. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and when you talk about the weather and the sky, your whole face lights up. I could listen to you talk for hours and never get bored." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, I am not asking for any promises," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, and I wanted to ask if you would let me court you properly. Let me take you to dinner again and on rides and whatever else you would like to do. I want to spend time with you, Amelia. I want to get to know everything about you." For a moment, Amelia could not speak, overwhelmed by the rush of emotion in her chest. Then she smiled, a smile that felt like it came from her very soul. Yes, I would like that very much. Because I feel it too, Ethan, that's something. I have felt it since the first time we talked." Ethan's face transformed with relief and joy. He reached up and gently cupped her cheek with his hand, his thumb brushing across her skin. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Amelia whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and perfect. Amelia's eyes drifted closed, and she felt like the world had narrowed down to just this moment, just the two of them. His lips were soft but firm, and the kiss held a promise of more, of possibilities spreading out before them like the vast Texas sky. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing a little harder. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cupping her face. "I have wanted to do that for so long." "Me too," Amelia admitted, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other until finally Ethan stepped back reluctantly. "I should let you get inside. It is getting late." They walked the last few steps to the boarding house door, hands clasped together. At the threshold, Ethan raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Tomorrow, can I see you tomorrow? I have Sunday off. I could pack a picnic. Perfect. I will pick you up at noon. We can ride out to a place I know, a canyon with a spring. It is beautiful. I will look forward to it." Amelia reluctantly let go of his hand and slipped inside, turning to give him one last smile before closing the door. She leaned against the door, her heart singing, and found Mrs. Henderson standing in the hallway with a knowing smile. "Well, how was dinner?" "Perfect," Amelia said, unable to stop grinning. "It was absolutely perfect." The next few weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness. Ethan came into town whenever he could spare time from the ranch, and they spent every possible moment together. They went on picnics, rode out to see beautiful parts of the desert landscape, and spent long evenings sitting on the boarding house porch talking about everything and nothing. Amelia met Ethan's father, a frail man who had good days and bad, but who smiled when he saw how his son looked at Amelia. "You are good for him," Mr. Kimble said to her one afternoon when Ethan was out checking on something at the barn. "He has been carrying too much weight, too much worry. You make him happy." "He makes me happy too," Amelia said honestly. As summer progressed into early fall, Amelia continued to prove her worth to the ranching community. She predicted a late-season thunderstorm that allowed ranchers to move their herds to areas where they could benefit from the rain and fresh grass growth. She warned of a cold snap in September that was unusually early, giving people time to prepare and protect their animals and crops. Her reputation grew, and people started coming to her regularly for weather advice. Ethan was her biggest supporter, always trusting her predictions and acting on them. His herd thrived under the careful management that her weather knowledge allowed, and the ranch began to recover from the difficult years during his father's illness. The other ranchers noticed, and several approached Ethan about sharing Amelia's insights with them as well. One evening in late October, Ethan and Amelia sat on a hill overlooking his ranch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They had ridden out after dinner, wanting privacy and time alone. Ethan had been quiet all evening, and Amelia could sense he had something on his mind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. Ethan was quiet for a moment longer, then said, "I am thinking about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want it to look like?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you in it, Amelia, not just as someone I court, but as my wife, as my partner in everything." Amelia's heart seemed to stop and then race forward. "Ethan, I know it has only been a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." His voice was steady and sure. "You are everything I never knew I was looking for. You are brilliant and kind and brave. You challenge me and support me. When I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you by my side." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small but perfect diamond. "Amelia Olsen, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and help me build a life here?" Tears sprang to Amelia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you. I love you. I think I have loved you since that day you held me through the dust storm." "I love you too," Ethan said, his own voice rough with emotion. He slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before, a kiss full of promise and commitment and love. They were married 6 weeks later, in late November of 1883, in a small ceremony at the church in Shafter. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears, and Ethan's father had a good day and was able to attend and give them his blessing. The whole town turned out, grateful to Amelia for all the ways she had helped them over the months, and celebratory toward Ethan, who was well liked and respected. Amelia moved out to the ranch, into the house that Ethan's father had built decades ago. It was a solid adobe structure with thick walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter, and Amelia immediately felt at home. She set up a small study where she could keep her father's journals and make her own observations, and Ethan made sure she had everything she needed. Their life together fell into a comfortable rhythm. Amelia continued her weather predictions, which became increasingly valuable to the ranch and the surrounding community. Ethan consulted her on every major decision about the herd, trusting her insights about coming weather patterns. Together, they began to build something new, a ranching operation that worked with nature instead of fighting against it, that used weather knowledge to maximize success and minimize losses. Winter came, unusually mild, which Amelia had predicted. They used the good weather to make repairs and improvements to the ranch infrastructure. Ethan's father passed peacefully in his sleep in early January, and while it was sad, it was also a relief that his suffering had ended. Amelia held Ethan as he grieved, providing the support and comfort he needed. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Amelia discovered she was pregnant in March, and Ethan was overjoyed. He became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous, until Amelia laughingly reminded him that pregnant women had been doing ranch work for centuries, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. But it was in late April that Amelia's weather-reading ability would be tested again in a dramatic way. She woke one morning with a feeling of unease, something off in the atmosphere that she could not quite identify at first. She went outside before dawn and stood in the yard, feeling the air, watching the sky lighten in the east. The wind was wrong. It was coming from the southeast, warm and moist, unusual for this desert region. The air felt heavy, charged with energy, and when the sun finally rose it illuminated clouds building on the horizon, massive towers of white and gray that were growing taller by the minute. Ethan found her standing there an hour later, still watching the sky, her face troubled. "What is it?" "Storm coming," Amelia said slowly. "But not dust, water. A lot of water. Ethan, I think we are going to get flash floods." Ethan looked at the sky, at the building clouds, and trusted her instantly. "The cattle are spread out across the lower range. If the washes flood, they could be trapped. We need to move them to higher ground. Now." Amelia turned to him urgently. "This is going to be bad, Ethan. I can feel it." They mobilized immediately. Ethan gathered his crew, and they rode out at full speed to round up the herd and move them away from the dry washes and arroyos that crisscrossed the lower rangeland. These washes were dry most of the year, but when heavy rain fell in the mountains, they could fill with rushing water in minutes, deadly torrents that swept away anything in their path. Amelia stayed at the ranch house, watching the weather develop, her instincts screaming that this was going to be even worse than she had initially thought. The clouds continued to build, reaching incredible heights, and she could see the distinctive anvil shape that meant severe thunderstorms. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold: rotation in the clouds, a slight but definite spinning motion. She had never seen a tornado in this region, but she knew they were possible. The conditions were right. Warm, moist air colliding with dry desert air, strong winds aloft, instability in the atmosphere. If a tornado formed, it could devastate anything in its path. Amelia made a decision. She saddled a horse and rode out toward where she knew Ethan and the crew were working, riding as fast as she dared in her condition. She had to warn them. They needed to find shelter immediately. The sky had turned an ominous greenish color, and the wind was picking up, gusting unpredictably. Amelia could hear thunder rumbling in the distance, a deep bass growl that seemed to shake the ground. She rode hard, her heart pounding with fear for Ethan and the men. She found them in a wide valley, the cattle mostly gathered and being driven toward higher ground. Ethan saw her coming and rode to meet her, his face creased with worry. "Amelia, you should not be out here." "Tornado possible," Amelia shouted over the rising wind. "Look at the clouds. We need to find shelter now." Ethan looked up and his face went pale. The clouds above them were rotating visibly now, a massive mesocyclone spinning slowly. Even as they watched, a funnel began to descend from the cloud base, a gray finger reaching toward the earth. "Everyone, find cover." Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. "Get to the rocks now." There was a jumble of boulders and rocky outcroppings about 200 yards away, the only shelter in this exposed valley. The cowboys immediately abandoned the herd and rode for their lives toward the rocks. Ethan grabbed the reins of Amelia's horse and led her at a gallop, racing against the descending funnel. The tornado touched down behind them with a roar like a freight train. Amelia risked a glance back and saw it, a writhing column of gray and brown, debris already swirling in its vortex. It was moving across the valley, and it was coming their way. They reached the rocks with seconds to spare. Ethan practically pulled Amelia from her saddle and dragged her into a crevice between two large boulders. The other cowboys were squeezing into similar spaces, and everyone pressed themselves as low and tight as they could. The tornado passed less than 100 yards from their position. The sound was indescribable, a howling shriek that drowned out all thought. The wind tried to suck them from their shelter, and debris flew past at incredible speed. Amelia pressed her face against Ethan's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her and their unborn child, and prayed. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the tornado was past, moving across the valley and up into the hills beyond. The roar faded to a howl, then to a rush, and finally to an eerie silence. Slowly, carefully, they emerged from the rocks. The landscape had been transformed. The tornado's path was clearly visible, a scar across the land where everything had been stripped away. Miraculously, the path had missed both the cattle and the area where they had taken shelter. But it had been close, terrifyingly close. "Is everyone all right?" Ethan called out, his voice shaking. One by one, the cowboys reported in. A few cuts and bruises, but everyone had survived. The horses had scattered in panic but were slowly being rounded up. And the cattle, though terrified and scattered, seemed largely unharmed. Ethan turned to Amelia, his hands framing her face, his eyes intense. "You saved us again. If you had not warned us, if we had not found shelter." He could not finish the sentence, just pulled her close and held her tight. "I was so scared," Amelia whispered against his neck. "I was so scared I would not reach you in time." "You did. You always do." Ethan pulled back to look at her, his expression fierce. "But Amelia, you are pregnant. You should not have risked yourself like that. What if something had happened to you or the baby?" "What if something had happened to you?" Amelia countered, her own fear translating to anger. "I could not just sit at home while you were in danger. I would not." They stared at each other for a moment, and then Ethan's expression softened. "We are quite a pair, are we not? Both too stubborn and too protective for our own good." "I suppose we are." Amelia managed a shaky smile. The tornado had been just the beginning. As Amelia had predicted, heavy rains followed, drenching the parched landscape. The dry washes filled with rushing water within minutes, exactly as she had feared. But because they had moved the cattle to higher ground, and because everyone had taken shelter from the tornado, there were no casualties. Other ranches in the area were not so lucky, losing animals and sustaining damage from both the tornado and the flash floods. Once again, Amelia's ability to read the weather had proven invaluable. Word spread throughout the region, and her reputation grew. Ranchers from miles around began consulting her before making major decisions, and she found herself becoming an unofficial weather expert for the entire area. As her pregnancy progressed, Amelia had to limit her riding and outdoor activities, but she continued to make her observations from the ranch house. Ethan built her an observatory on the roof, a small platform where she could see the entire sky and make notes in her journals. It became her favorite place, and she spent hours there charting weather patterns and making predictions. Their son was born in November of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Thomas, after Amelia's father, and Ethan proved to be a devoted and loving father. Watching him with their son, seeing the gentleness and care he showed, made Amelia fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new pattern with a baby in the house. Amelia balanced motherhood with her weather work, often observing the sky with Thomas in her arms. As he grew, she began teaching him the same things her father had taught her, pointing out cloud formations and wind patterns, though he was far too young to understand. The ranch continued to prosper under their combined management. Ethan handled the day-to-day operations and the business side, while Amelia provided the weather intelligence that allowed them to stay ahead of problems and take advantage of opportunities. They became known as the most successful ranch in the region, and other operations tried to emulate their methods. 2 years after Thomas was born, Amelia gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, and their family felt complete. The house that had once seemed too big was now filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Ethan hired additional help to assist with both the ranch and the household, wanting to ensure Amelia did not become overwhelmed with responsibilities. As the children grew, they all showed interest in weather, though Thomas was particularly gifted, seeming to have inherited his mother's instinctive understanding of atmospheric conditions. By the time he was 6 years old, he could predict basic weather changes with surprising accuracy, and Amelia began formally teaching him everything she knew. One evening in the spring of 1891, Amelia and Ethan sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Thomas was showing his sisters how to identify different types of clouds, his young voice serious and instructional. Amelia smiled, remembering doing the same with her father. "He is going to be even better at this than you are," Ethan observed, his arm around Amelia's shoulders. "Perhaps. He certainly has the passion for it." Amelia leaned into her husband's warmth. "Can you believe it has been almost 8 years since that dust storm, since I rode out to warn you? Best decision you ever made," Ethan said, grinning. "Well, second best. The best was agreeing to marry me." Amelia laughed. "Pretty sure proposing to me was your best decision. Cannot argue with that." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression growing serious. "I mean it though, Amelia. These years with you have been the happiest of my life. Building this ranch together, raising our children, facing every challenge side by side. I could not imagine a better partner or a better life." "Neither could I." Amelia kissed him softly. "I love you, Ethan Kimble, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said," Ethan murmured against her lips. "I am full of surprises." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Amelia automatically noted the cloud patterns and wind direction, part of her mind always working, always observing. Clear weather ahead, she thought, calm and peaceful. Thomas came running up to the porch, his sisters trailing behind him. "Mama, Papa, come look. I see a storm cloud forming way out west. Can we watch it together?" Ethan and Amelia exchanged amused glances, then stood to follow their son. As they walked across the yard, Amelia thought about how much her life had changed since that dust storm 8 years ago. She had been alone then, uncertain of her future, knowing only that she had a gift she wanted to share. Now she had a family, a home, a purpose. She had a husband who loved and respected her, who valued her knowledge and supported her dreams. She had children who were learning to read the sky as she did, carrying on her father's legacy. She had a community that depended on her and appreciated her contributions. The weather would always be unpredictable, bringing challenges and dangers, but Amelia no longer faced it alone. She had Ethan by her side, his strength complementing hers, their partnership stronger than any storm. Together, they had built something lasting and true, a love that could weather anything nature threw at them. As they reached Thomas and looked where he was pointing at the distant clouds, Amelia felt a deep sense of contentment. This was her life, her purpose, her joy. Reading the weather, protecting the herd, loving her family. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, and she squeezed gently. He looked down at her and smiled, that same smile that had first made her heart flutter years ago, and she smiled back. The storm on the horizon was small and would likely dissipate before reaching them. But even if it did not, even if they faced another dust storm or tornado or flash flood, Amelia knew they would face it together. That was what made all the difference. The sun finally set completely, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Thomas was excitedly pointing out constellations to his sisters, teaching them the names their mother had taught him. The night air was cool and pleasant, perfect weather for stargazing. "Come on," Ethan said softly. "Let us go inside and get these little ones ready for bed. Then maybe we can sit out here a while longer, just the two of us." "I would like that," Amelia agreed. They gathered up the children and headed inside, Thomas still chattering about weather and clouds and storms. Amelia listened with half her attention. The rest focused on the feeling of Ethan's hand in hers, the sound of her daughters giggling, the warmth of their home waiting for them. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Amelia and Ethan did return to the porch. They sat close together on the swing Ethan had built, moving gently back and forth, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, the question he had asked her hundreds of times over their years together. "About how lucky I am," Amelia said simply. "About how that dust storm brought us together, how my ability to read the weather gave me a purpose here, how everything worked out better than I could have planned." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Ethan said firmly. "You made this happen. Your courage, riding out to warn us. Your knowledge, helping the ranch succeed. Your love, building this family with me. That was not luck, Amelia. That was you being extraordinary." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind, born of happiness too large to contain. "You are going to make me cry. Sorry." But Ethan did not sound sorry at all. He sounded pleased. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of companionship and deep understanding. Amelia felt perfectly at peace, perfectly content. This moment right now was everything she had ever wanted. A shooting star streaked across the sky, bright and brief, and the twins would have been disappointed to have missed it. But Amelia saw it, and she made a wish, though she had everything she could possibly need. She wished for this happiness to continue, for her family to remain healthy and safe, for many more years of sitting on this porch with Ethan beside her. "Did you see that?" Ethan asked. "Yes. Did you make a wish?" "I did, but I cannot tell you what it was or it will not come true." "I think I can guess." Amelia shifted to rest her head on his shoulder. It was probably the same as mine. Probably. Ethan kissed the top of her head. Want to know a secret? Always. Every morning when I wake up next to you, I still cannot quite believe this is real. That you chose me. That we built this life together. I spent so many years just focused on the ranch, on responsibility and duty, never thinking about love or partnership. And then you rode into my life on a borrowed horse to warn me about a storm, and everything changed. Amelia lifted her head to look at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes even in the starlight. You changed everything for me too. I was drifting when I came to Shafter, just trying to survive, to find a place to belong. You gave me that place. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to use the gift my father gave me. You saw me, Ethan, really saw me, not just as strange or odd, but as someone valuable. You are valuable. You are essential. Ethan cupped her face gently. To me, to the children, to this whole community. Never doubt that. They kissed then, a long, slow kiss that held all the love and commitment of their years together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. We should probably get some sleep, Amelia said reluctantly. Thomas will be up at dawn wanting to check the weather with me. 5 more minutes, Ethan bargained. Just 5 more minutes of this. 5 more minutes, Amelia agreed, settling back against his shoulder. But 5 minutes turned into 20, then 30, neither of them willing to break the spell of the peaceful night. Finally, when the cool air made Amelia shiver despite Ethan's warmth, they went inside together, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and storms, of children growing and cattle thriving, of love deepening and strengthening. Thomas did indeed become even more skilled at weather prediction than his mother, eventually publishing papers on atmospheric science that gained recognition beyond their small region of Texas. The twins developed their own interests, but never lost their appreciation for the weather and the land. Amelia and Ethan grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the landscape they loved. But their love never weathered, never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered by challenges faced together and joys shared completely. On their 25th wedding anniversary in November of 1908, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house was filled with family and friends, with laughter and music and celebration. At one point, Ethan pulled Amelia outside onto the porch, wanting a moment alone with her. 25 years, he said wonderingly. How is that possible? It feels like just yesterday you came riding up to warn me about that dust storm. Time moves strangely, Amelia agreed. She was 47 now, her auburn hair liberally streaked with silver, lines around her eyes from years of squinting at the sky. But Ethan still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. But every year has been worth it. Every day, Ethan corrected. Every single day with you has been a gift. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Amelia looked at him questioningly, and he smiled. Open it. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a cloud. It was beautiful, clearly custom-made, and Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes. I had it commissioned specially, Ethan explained. Because you taught me to look up, to pay attention to the sky. You showed me that there is knowledge and beauty in things I had always taken for granted. You changed how I see the world, Amelia, and I wanted you to have something that represents that. It is perfect, Amelia whispered, touching the pendant with gentle fingers. Help me put it on. Ethan fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin in a touch that still sent shivers through her after all these years. She turned to face him, the pendant resting just above her heart. I love you, she said simply. More than words can express. You are my partner, my best friend, my love. Thank you for these 25 years. Thank you for believing in me when we barely knew each other, for trusting my knowledge of the weather, for building this life with me. Thank you for saving my herd, Ethan said with a smile. And my life. And my heart. They kissed there on the porch, just as they had kissed hundreds of times before and would kiss hundreds of times again. Inside, the party continued, their children and grandchildren celebrating, but for this moment it was just the two of them, just Amelia and Ethan, just the cowboy and the woman who could read the weather like no other. The sky above them was clear and full of stars, promising good weather ahead. But even if storms had been gathering, even if danger threatened, they would have faced it together. That was their strength, their gift to each other. Two people who had found their perfect match, who complemented and completed each other, who were stronger together than either could be alone. The party eventually wound down and their guests went home, leaving just the family. Thomas and his wife, the twins and their husbands, and 6 grandchildren of various ages. They sat together in the living room, sharing stories and memories, and Amelia felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was what she had saved all those years ago when she rode out to warn Ethan about the dust storm. Not just the cattle, not just the ranch, but this entire future. This family, these relationships, this love. All of it had stemmed from that one brave decision to risk herself for someone she barely knew. Late that night, after everyone had finally gone to bed, Amelia found herself unable to sleep. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Ethan, and went up to her observatory on the roof. It was a clear November night, cool but not cold, and the stars were brilliant. She stood there looking up at the sky, reading the patterns she had studied her entire life, and felt a profound sense of peace. Her father would have been proud of her, she thought. Proud of how she had used the knowledge he gave her, proud of the family she had built, proud of the life she had lived. Could not sleep, came Ethan's voice behind her, and she turned to find him climbing up onto the observatory platform. Just wanted to look at the stars, Amelia said. Did I wake you? No, I just reached for you and found you gone. Ethan came to stand beside her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. Cold out here, not so bad. But Amelia appreciated the warmth of the blanket and his body beside hers. Ethan, do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I had not ridden out that day? Every time I look at you, Ethan said honestly. Every time I see our children or sit on our porch or work with the herd. I think about how close I came to losing everything and how you saved it all, saved me. You saved me too, Amelia said softly. I was lost when I came here, Ethan, grieving my father, uncertain of my future. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You listened to me when others thought I was strange. You believed in me. That was easy, Ethan said, pulling her closer. You made it easy to believe. They stood together in the starlight, two people who had weathered every storm together and come out stronger. Their love story had started with a dust storm and a desperate warning, but it had grown into something deep and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone, carried on in their children and grandchildren. Below them, the ranch spread out in the darkness, the land they had worked and protected for over 2 decades. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, safe and healthy thanks to the careful weather management Amelia had pioneered. It was a legacy she could be proud of, a difference she had made in the world. Come on, Ethan said eventually. Let us go back to bed. Tomorrow is another day, and knowing our grandson, he will be up at dawn wanting you to teach him about weather. Amelia laughed. Just like his father before him, it never ends. Hope it never does. Ethan helped her down from the observatory, his hand steady and sure. Hope the Kimble Ranch is reading weather for generations to come, all thanks to you. Thanks to us, Amelia corrected. Everything we built together. They made their way back to their bedroom, moving quietly through the dark house. In their room, they climbed into bed, and Amelia nestled against Ethan's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was home, this was safety, this was love. "Good night, my weather woman," Ethan murmured, already half asleep. "Good night, my cowboy," Amelia whispered back. She closed her eyes, drifting toward sleep, content and complete. Outside, the wind whispered across the desert, carrying secrets and stories written in the air. Amelia heard them even in her drowsiness, understanding the language of the weather as naturally as breathing. Clear skies tomorrow, she thought. Perfect weather. Perfect day. And as she fell asleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the family they had created, in the home they had built together, Amelia knew that her life had turned out exactly as it should. The weather had brought them together and kept them safe, but it was love that had made them whole. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, and the desert wind sang its eternal song. And in a ranch house in Shafter, Texas, two people who had saved each other slept peacefully, ready to face whatever weather tomorrow would bring, together always, forever and ever, until the end of their days and beyond.